Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Rise and Fall from Christopher Bollinger and Ludically. Rise and Fall is an area control game with a minor degree of conflict in which you're going to be growing a variety of different types of units, trying to vie for control over this landmass, trying to get your units in position, gather control of the terrains, use your merchants to acquire as much resources as you possibly can in-game as well, all while trying to manage the rise and flow of your various unit types. The general idea of the game is in the game you're going to have a hand of cards. Each player is going to have a hand of these cards that all define the types of units they have, although at any point you only have in your hand the cards that actually match the units on the board. So in the case of blue over here, we currently have ships in play, we have these cities in play over here, ships and cities, and we have these nomads in play as well. Because we have those, these are the only cards that represent our hand, and these also represent the actions that we're taking. We're going to be using these cards every single turn to define the actions we take, playing a card of a specific type, so all players are going to go ahead and place a card face down on the table, all revealing the card at the same time, and then take actions with all their ships. Every single card does display on it the specific actions that unit type can take. So you have all that on your cards themselves are your play aid as you go through things, as you try to figure out how to control the sequencing of your units, of the growth of your empire, in order to have the most efficient engine possible. Because the general idea as you go through the game is as you build a unit type, the first time you put a new unit on the board, you're going to go into the hand of cards of the other remaining units, and you're going to grab that unit. If you go ahead and build a temple over here, you're going to add the temple to your hand of cards, which means you have another card that you can play. The problem is, in Rise and Fall, you can only pull back your cards once you've played your last card. Meaning, the more unit types you have, the more diverse the set of actions you have, but the more unit types you have, the less flexibility of trying to double down on the same efficiency of the same unit. If you only have 2 cards in your hand, if you only have your cities and your nomads over here, you'll be able to run an efficient cycle again and again and again of triggering them out, but also be limited in the scope of your actions. And so Rise and Fall ends up being a game where your goal of the game, the starting point of the game, is going to be 3 unit types. Throughout the course of the game, you're going to try to add more unit types to the board because there are a whole bunch of units. You can see on the bottom over here, each card shows the amount of units there are. There are 5 ships you can have, but there are also 8 nomads you can have. You can have 8 nomads on the board, each of those nomads being part of your resource engine, spreading around the board, moving, gathering cities, all those things as you try to figure out how to efficiently spread your engine. And whenever you play a card, you're going to take one action of that card with each nomad, and each nomad can take a different action. So for example, if I go ahead and play this card over here, looking at the board, I can go ahead and this nomad can go, let's actually look over here, be more efficient. This nomad can go ahead and pop up over there. Let's put it on its side to show we've used it. That's going to be a move action where you can move across certain terrain types. You cannot move across this over here or the water, and you cannot go up or you cannot go down too many levels as far as the actual terrain type on the board. That's going to be a move action. But from there, the other nomads can go ahead and take any of these other actions. Either potentially, for example, over here, we can go ahead and use a nomad to generate a resource. So we can take this nomad down here, turn on its side, and generate a stone resource because it's on stone. This nomad over here, we're not going to do that because this nomad, we're going to go ahead and pay in the resources shown in order to go ahead and build it on a city. So we're going to pay the resources and turn this nomad into a city that's then going to populate onto the board. Every single unit in the game has different actions you can take, and when you trigger that unit type, you will take actions with all of that unit type. Then from there, because we've now just built this extra city, we'll stand up our units, we'll take the other turns of the other players, and then we'll go ahead and play down another card from our hand. This card's over here on the table, it's out of sight. We're going to go ahead and play our next card, our cities over here, now that we have a 3rd city on the board, to go ahead and generate actions with those cities. We can go ahead and put nomads on the board. So for example, this city can go ahead and activate, putting a nomad right down there. This city over here can go ahead and tax over here. You can go ahead and turn a nomad you can train. So let's say actually put this over here. If we put this nomad over here with this city, activating this city, we can then go ahead and train the nomad into one of the other unit types by paying a cost, replacing that unit with one of the units, putting a merchant on the board, and then grabbing the merchant card from off to the side and putting it into our hand by paying that cost. And the last city over here, we're going to go ahead and simply tax over here. So we'll tax, gathering 3 money also being points at a ratio of 2 for 1 at the end of the game, and we'll go ahead and add these points over here to our hand and get those as well. And that's basically what you're doing with this engine of actions. Every unit type has a way that they generate. Temples will go ahead and convert other units. It's going to be the biggest area of conflict in the game as you convert another unit type into your own. Merchants will wander around the board giving you flexibility in your resources, and also when they interact with other cities or even your own cities, they'll go ahead and generate mass amounts of resources. The explorers can wander around the board in a significant high level of speed where you have these nomads over here. These nomads can go ahead and move one terrain with a lot of restrictions, these explorers over here can move 1, 2, 3, can move 3 own units, and can move across more terrain types, giving them a lot more flexibility as far as what they do and how they do, and eventually charge across the board to a remote region and turn into what they need to further the growth of your empire, because at the end of everything we just showed you here, this is an area control game. This is an area control game where you'll get a lot of points in-game in terms of the money you get and in terms of the ratio of turning those into points, getting all of that. You'll get a lot of resources in-game, but you're also going to get a ton of points end-game in what is an area control engine. Every single terrain type over here is going to score in their little blocks, every single option. So for example, if we look over here, this region right over here is a mountain. Mountainous regions score 4 points per region. So this can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 regions. That's a potential total of 24 points. If you can get your explorer across the map, you now have an option over there to go ahead and buy to take control of those points if you can get a little bit more of a control there, which means charging across the map to get positioning in the right area is a lot of points. You're going to have this little hand dandy player aid showing you how you score at the end of the game. Every 2 money is worth a point over here. You can see each type over here, the cards are all worth a point. I'll show you that in a second. And then terrains, glaciers and mountains are worth 4 points per terrain in the size. Forests are worth 3, waters are worth 2, and plains are worth 1, giving you a ton of points, an absolute ton of points on this board to compete over. Right now in this region over here, at a ratio of 2, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 times 2, 28 points currently going to red, because red has 2 boats, 2 yellows, 1 over there. There are an absolute ton of points to fight over on this terrain over here. And then lastly, each card has a number of points you'll get depending on how many units of that type you have on the board. If you've built all 3 of your explorers, that's 10 points. If you built all 8 of your nomads, it's 8 points. Over here, the highest ratio, if you have built all 6 of your merchants, you're going to score 36 points. They're all going to give you chunks of points for adding that type of unit to the board, which means this game often rewards you for doubling down on strategies. And there's more. There's more stuff here. There's more things going on. Let's talk about a few different things. First of all, in terms of the points, while we're talking about points, let's talk about the fact that during the course of the game end trigger is going to trigger whenever a player has built all of a unit type. So for example, if I have built my last merchant, I'm going to go ahead and look over here, and I'm going to find the merchant, and I'm going to grab this merchant. I'm going to get 20 points at the end of the game and slide this up. When that happens, in a round in which the last of a type is depleted for the first time, and in the future, if somebody else depletes a merchant, nothing happens, but if they deplete another resource type, if they've built all of theirs of a type, they'll grab their corresponding point token. But when that happens, you have to burn a card from your hand. You're going to take a card from your hand, you're going to burn it, which means this card is now out of play, being put off to the side. Choose a resource type from one of the ones you have in play and remove it from the game. Now you could buy it back. You can buy it back for 5 points right now because this is the first time it happened. The second time you buy back 10, then 20, then 40. The longer the game goes, the more it's going to cost to buy back the card, but there's pros and cons to having the card out of play. Having the card out of play restricts your actions. You can no longer use your merchants, but the flip side is it means you can use your other cards faster. You can not worry about that. You can build towards a faster engine as you build and expand out what you're trying to do with civilization with a faster turn structure as you rotate between the resource types, the unit types that matter to you the most. And so that's going to be a source of points as well as a source of weeding your cards from the game as you progress until eventually 4 of those are done. 4 players, or 4, it doesn't matter how many players, until 4 of the unit types have been at some point or another fully built out. Even if they get converted later, you're going to go ahead and trigger endgame there. And then lastly, one thing I didn't cover yet is this game will be set up by the players. There's going to be a few tiles in the beginning in the center of the table, and then players will rotate going around the board, placing tiles how they want to build the world that's going to matter to you. Now, this might be a bit overwhelming at first. In fact, at first, I would highly recommend that you just randomly build out the board, because until you've played the game, there's not enough strategy or understanding as far as how the board actually plays out. But that first game, build out a random board or follow the pattern in the rulebook, anything like that. But once you know the game, this gives you a lot of room to actually try to build an empire that is as cutthroat as you can make it in terms of the situational, the connection points, how the ships connect, because units convert into other units. Frequently in this game, a ship will convert into another unit so that it can move across the land and convert back, but all of that takes time. All of that results in a slower engine. And so the way you build, the way you navigate, the way you move, and the way you position all your units from the start of the game and how you spread across the table, all those things will have a significant impact on the game. And that's basically Rise and Fall. Have a hand of cards. The cards determine what actions you take. You'll add cards to your hand as you build new units. You'll play those cards one at a time to take actions with the units, only pulling them back into your hand when you play the last of a card type, pulling them back, repeating the cycle, and trying to build the most efficient area control engine as you harvest resources, move around the board, threaten your opponents with a few temples that are well placed here and there, connect with them using your merchants, and generally show that you have the best general influence in this world. Which brings us to a review, starting off with ease of play. For all that's going on in this game, this is actually a very simple game, and there is a lot going on, but the core cycle of what you're doing is very easy to get into. The core rule set is play a card until eventually you pull them back, a common mechanic we've seen before, and the complexity comes down to the fact that every time you play a card, you're activating all units of that type, potentially taking different actions with each unit, which gives you a lot of flexibility, a lot of fun things you can do in the game without being an overly complex game. This is a game that takes a little bit to understand why and how and the engine. This is a game that the first time we played this, I remember we reset the game like 10 minutes in because we're like, oh, okay, great, we're gonna get this. We now understand what's going on. But the core rules are pretty easy. It's just a little bit of understanding as far as how everything will, practically speaking, play out. Game length comes in, I want to say, around 2 hours. It does vary for sure, depending on the player count, depending on where you are in terms of what number of game you're up to, whether you just taught rules. But I want to say around 2 hours for most of our experiences with this. As far as player count, this is a 2 to 4 player game. I have played this at 3 and 4 players. I have not played it at 2. I would be willing to play this at 2. I think this is an area control game that would work at 2, although I think my preference so far has been 3. 3 gives you enough interaction between the players, enough interaction on the board, that there's a lot going on and a lot to enjoy here. 4 took a little longer in terms of the downtime, and 2 I think would still be fun. I think there'd be enough back and forth because this is not a conflict heavy game. There is area control, which means more players tends to be a little better, but overall I would say I think 2 would work as well, just haven't played it there yet. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with the production value. Now this is a good time to note, or actually to choose this at the beginning of this video was a good time to note, that this is a prototype. Rise and Fall is a prototype. This is an active game on Kickstarter. You can check that out. There'll be a link down below. But everything you see here, rules, components, all that stuff, subject to change. But overall, component-wise, this game is already killing it. I don't know what the final production looks like, but just these sheer, I mean, these pieces over here, the way you have these pieces connected, all of these look so impressive. I'm incredibly impressed with even just the production value of just the prototype. Forget the final game, although I say forget the final game with the understanding that the final game, for all I know, is less impressive. Or more impressive. I don't know yet. We'll find out. Check the Kickstarter for that. But everything I see here is absolutely amazing. And the table presence, for that matter, is insane. The table presence of the multi-layer board that you build out. This is a game that I've had set up, and I've already, since setting this up, I've had 2 people in my house already comment on how this looks and how they want to play it. And that's not usually what happens with the games that are set up on this table over here. And so, yeah, this game has a table presence. It pulls people in, and it makes the gameplay more experienced, especially as it interacts with the rules in terms of the layering of how the tiles are and how far down you can jump or go up a layer, so it impacts the rules as well. Table presence is insane. And everything you do is important. This is one of those games where there's an engine at play. You want to build out your cities more so that you can build out your nomads more, so that you can then get those merchants in place, so that you can go move across the board and then move those ships in play. Everything cascades into each other in the sense that even those starting 3 cards and the starting setup of the game is going to give you a merchant, a nomad, a city, and a boat. And the starting 3 cards, the order in which you can play those 3 cards to different strategic options just off the bat is already present, as players can try to figure out, well, I want to do this for that, but I want to do this for that, and I want to get that extra city on the board so I can get more nomads on the board, but if I move my ship into a nomad first, then I can get the first city. There's a tier and a sequencing as far as how you're going to do things, and they all give you strategies that will expand further and further the more the board grows out, the more the other players are doing things, how they're doing things, and how you can position your temples to get in the way, your merchants to get in the way, to manipulate from the economy of the game. There are a ton of strategies you can pursue here, and a lot of pathways to victory, and pathways to victory that are further expanded upon because of the fact that there's in-game scoring to a large degree as well as end-game scoring, and it's very hard to see who's winning until you get to the very end, which is something I generally like. The game has a cash pool over there, and a cash pool that you will modulate the cash pool based on the number of players, which is important because having that extra 200 coins in the game can situate yourself in such a way that players can very heavily prioritize the in-game engine, not letting the game end. And so the game has a cash pool that deprives and slowly falls apart, so that eventually at a certain point you have to trigger that endgame for those additional points, because you can't pull, what's the expression, blood from a rock or something like that. You can't pull blood from a rock. You cannot get money out of the game once the money's already fully out of the game, which is an intentional structure. An intentional structure I found out the very first time I tried to go with a heavy merchant strategy, and realized at the end of the game that there was not enough money to go around for my heavy merchant strategy. There's a lot of ways to get points in-game and end-game, and they all give you a lot of reasons as far as how you're going to play your cards, and that strategy even further expands upon the fact that you have a choice between having the flexibility of different action types versus you also have the flexibility of trying to weed your deck for the most efficient engine. The game gives you different pathways forwards, all of which give you different ways to approach the same beast of a game, which is very satisfying as you go through it. As far as what I don't like, the game can take a bit to spread out from the board over here. Over here we have this large board over here, and initial setup will give you some degree of flexibility as how you place your units, but once your stuff are placed, it is a little hard to initially spread out. Sure, you'll have these units over here that can move 3, but it can take several turns before you get to that point, and moving your nomads one at a time across the board is very unsatisfying. It is far more rewarding to go ahead and utilize them for just their resource gathering or turning into cities, and so that initial spread of the game is impactful, and it's something that further games will allow you to see the strategy of it and why it's so important. But that first game, I think for most people, that first game is likely going to be fairly condensed because it just feels easier to build where you are and to expand where you are and to gather the resources where you are, as opposed to wandering into someone else's territory where they have more of a foothold, more units, and more anything. Although it's not a conflict heavy game, but getting into someone else's area takes a lot of work early game, and early game it can pay off later. But the game is a slow move. I wish there were more opportunities or more incentives to expand outwards early on, even though it is worthwhile, even though there's a lot of payoff to it. That early game decision can cost you if you do it too early, and if you do it too late, it can cost you as well. So this is an area control game where I do wish there was a bit more of a spread a bit earlier as opposed to waiting till the end game. Additionally, and possibly related, I almost wish there were more conflict in the game. Right now, this game is primarily about the area control. It's primarily about building up your engine, figuring out the cycle of cards you're going to play, what you're going to have more of, which units you're going to capitalize on, which cards you're playing as dead cards just so you can get your cards back. This game will have all of that here, but it also does so in a very low conflict game. Temples are going to be a bigger source of conflicts. Placing a temple down allows you to convert other units, which is a threat, make no mistake. Wandering into someone's area, placing down a temple in a situation where they have their merchant perfectly set up so that you can convert their merchant to your own merchant and start getting those cash revenues. There's a lot of strategy to it, but it's the only real sense of conflict in the game. Past that, it's area control. It's about having more. There's no real conflict. I almost want to see, and for context, I have no idea what the Kickstarter plans are or what they have. I think the base game as is excellent, but I would love to see a conflict module where you have the same game but a 7th card. A 7th card with something more conflict driven that forces a greater state of actual antagonistic aggressiveness towards each other. I like the game. I think it's great as is. I wish there were a variant or an expansion that took the same exact game and added more conflict to allow this engine to be utilized in both a more area control fashion as well as in a more conflict in your face fashion for those who want it. I think the game could very well thrive off of that, and I would definitely want to see more of that. As far as what I can see others not liking, first of all, setup can be a lot until you know the game. I mentioned this already, but this whole setup, this whole placing tiles down, layering them one over the other, the strategic benefits or reasons to do so one way or the other are too much. They're too much until you've played the game a time or two, and so I think that you want to go almost with pre-selected setups, giving the game players a few options for pre-selected setups for different player counts. I think would be a good idea to help people get this game moving up in front, get this game moving when they first get it, because I think it can take a few games before you have that strategy locked in and can go for that. And secondly, there is deck weeding in a way that you might find frustrating. At the end of the day, this game intentionally takes away cards that you might want because of the timer of the game. And it takes away those cards, and sure, you can buy them back, but you might find it frustrating to have all your merchants on the board unable to do anything because your card is gone. And so there's a decision point of pulling your cards back, and I like that. I like the decisions the game forces me into as a result, but it might not be for you if you're someone who does not like the deck weeding and the optimization around that it engenders. As far as final thoughts on Rise and Fall, I really like this game. I really like Rise and Fall a lot. This is one that, even from the very first setup, the game had me biased towards the production value, make no mistake, and the visual appeal of the board. All those things pulled me in off the bat. But the game is incredibly simple and yet incredibly strategic at the same time. This is one of those games that really makes me feel like there's a lot of reward to continuing to dive down into it, that even multiple games in, the levels of strategy, of pathways to victory that I've seen here are very wide. Every card has their own strength, and every card and every player generally is going to have certain types they focus on. That player is focusing on a little bit of a city-ship combination with a few things on the side. That player is focusing heavily on their merchants, and they're using their temples as a bit of a protection. You can see how players choose different combinations of 2 or 3 cards to be their focal point, while other players react in different ways, and I love how the game has continued to give me different strategies and reasons to pursue different viable options as I play Rise and Fall, and it's immensely rewarding. It has that compelling aspect of playing cards in different orders will all help you, and finding that perfect combination of cards is the puzzle of the game. It is the puzzle of trying to out-efficiency the other player. There are some potential downsides because of the fact that the conflict is not necessarily as hard until the end game, being more area control, so there is a degree of where I kind of want to be more conflict as opposed to feeling like you're just playing Concordia and spreading out your cards more efficiently than other players. So there are areas I want to see this game improved upon, but so far I really like what it's doing. I think it's a solid game that is very rewarding, has a great table presence, is a lot of fun, gives you lots of variability to the actual game experience and the reasons to dive back in. Overall, I am really liking Rise and Fall quite a bit. I'm giving this one a 4 out of 5 right now, which I think it has the possibility to grow over time. I'm still enjoying this one. I'm still having fun with it, especially if they add more things to it, especially if this becomes more than what it already is. Right now it's a 4 out of 5, but a 4 out of 5 that is trending upwards even as I speak. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, I mentioned it already, Concordia. If you're looking for another game that gives you a puzzle of how to play an order of cards, that you're trying to figure out which cards to play to trigger what growth and what production and what order to most efficiently maximize your engine, even though everything is going to push you forward, the particular order you pursue is the game, well then like Rise and Fall, Concordia will give you that exact puzzle in an excellent experience that is well loved. And then if you're just looking for area control, that's one of my favorite area control games, very different than Rise and Fall, but a classic solid area control game that has stood the test of time and is continuously well rated and well vetted. El Grande is a solid game that I highly recommend if you're just looking for pure area control without all of the other things thrown in. In any case, and until next time, I hope you found this video helpful. I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.